Morning.
Morning.
And happy second day of National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I increasingly am thinking about things in terms of anniversaries. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about information campaigns, misinformation. I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn and talk about the actual technical cybersecurity aspects of election interference, but come back around to information operations in interfering with U.S. politics. So in terms of these anniversaries, I think back 17 years ago, the events of September 11th. September 11th, when it all breaks down to its constituent parts, was a failure of intelligence, infusing intelligence and understanding what was going on, what our adversaries were doing. And in the same sense, it was a failure of imagination. It was a failure to really get out of our comfort zone and understand what it's possible that our adversaries could do and how they could use our own infrastructure, our own institutions against us. 2 years ago, we had the Russian efforts to interfere with the U.S. election, 2016 presidential elections, had a couple different aspects of it. I tend to break it down to three constituent parts. One is the cybersecurity, the technical hacking of voting equipment in the United States, managed, owned, operated by state and local governments who, by the U.S. Constitution and by law, are responsible for administering the elections, federal elections in the U.S. So the second piece of this operation was a hack and leak operation. It was getting into political campaigns. It was getting into specific candidates and their staff in looking for information that can be operationalized and weaponized. And the third piece is this ongoing, pervasive, pernicious information operations campaign looking to discord among the American public. And we see this all over the globe. But it's finding lines of division and exacerbating these divisions. So again, three buckets: hacking, technical hacking of election infrastructure, hack and leak against campaigns and political figures, and then this disinformation campaign. So when I think back again, 2 years ago, kind of taking it up a level, why was this so different? And this is why it's important and why I point out that it's National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Up until that point, generally speaking in the United States, cybersecurity threats had either been over there, a Ukraine grid event, or something else like that, or it had been intellectual property. It had been Sony. It had been Target. It was these intangible financial or intellectual property aspects. This was so galling and galvanizing because it was a true existential risk to our democratic institutions. There was potential to destabilize the American government. And that's why over the last year and a half, the Department of Homeland Security, as well as our federal interagency partners, the FBI, the intelligence community, and the State Department, have been working those three buckets of 2016 so hard. In fact, just last week, the President released the National Cyber Strategy. Page 9 of the National Cyber Strategy talks about protecting democracy and ensuring that on that first bucket of election infrastructure, that our state and local partners have the services, support, and technical assistance they need. So I'll unpack that really quickly and tell you about where we've gone over the course of the last year. We have formed a number of governance mechanisms, and those are just boring bureaucratic terms for, we know how to talk to each other now. In 2016, when we got the intelligence that the Russians were trying to interfere with and scan and disrupt voter registration systems in Illinois, for instance, we didn't know who to call because it was not an existing partnership. There was not a framework by which we could reach out and call the Secretary of State in Illinois or any other state and say, hey, this is going on. And when we did call and finally got in touch with somebody, they were like, who are you? Why is the Department of Homeland Security calling me? So over the last 2 years, but really over the last year, we've built these mechanisms and these information sharing protocols and these communications rules for when we get a piece of intelligence, we can share rapidly, we can share broadly. Now, that's part of it. It's raising awareness so that we can increase investments, make sure that we retire legacy equipment. This is just an engineering problem when you really boil it down. It's an engineering problem. It's a risk management problem. Update your systems, retire the legacy systems, patch, configure appropriately, use multi-factor authentication, all the basics we're repeating and really increasing the awareness about during National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. But it's more than that. It's also looking for market failures. It's looking at over the last 15 years where state and locals, governments in the United States are already struggling to make ends meet and provide basic social services. They're also having to invest in new equipment. So how do we help them get that new equipment? Congress earlier this year appropriated $380 million to all the states using an algorithm, so not every state gets the same. But nonetheless, that money was intended to update and retire legacy systems, to hire cybersecurity expertise at the state level, to conduct training, and things like that. But it's not enough. So the forward conversation, this conversation going forward is, what does it mean, what does it look like for government, federal, state, and local to work together? Because the way I look at this problem is no single state, Illinois, Virginia, Florida, no single state can withstand a directed attack by a nation state with the capabilities of Russia or China or Iran or North Korea. This is a team sport. It's collective defense. That's the approach we're taking. So in terms of 2018, between that $380 million that's been invested, between the training to state and locals, the services, the risk and vulnerability assessments that we've conducted, the technical capabilities that we've pushed out there, including intrusion detection systems sitting on top of state infrastructure, voting infrastructure. In 2016, less than 30% of voting infrastructure, the management systems for that voting infrastructure in the States, was covered by what's known as Albert intrusion detection system. By the midterms, about 92% will be covered. By 2020, our aim is for 100%. And we will have all the legacy equipment really updated, where there'll be an auditable paper trail. So that's where we are on election infrastructure. Next, we've got hack and leak. Hack and leak, again, it's basic cybersecurity principles. But the problem is, if a campaign is spending $1 on cybersecurity, that's $1 that's not going to an ad buy or increasing the profile of the candidate. So what DHS, working with our federal interagency partners, is doing is providing a suite of services, vulnerability assessments, best practice, training, guidance, things like that. But we're also working with the private sector, and the private sector is providing free services. There are some hoops they have to jump through with the Federal Election Commission, but they're working through that, and we're seeing progress. But this is not a sprint. This is a marathon, and unfortunately, it's not a marathon at 26.2 miles. It keeps going. This is like an ultra marathon. There's no end to this race. So we have to continue being diligent, we have to share, and we have to just administer those basic best practices. And then there's that third and final bucket, that information operations campaigns. So when I look at this issue, I break it down into two pieces. There's the static, and then there's the dynamic. And what I mean by that is, and particularly when you look at the 2017 intelligence community assessment, looking back at the 2016 election, there's a lot of discussion of Twitter handles and Facebook pages and profiles and amplification of messaging on new and social media. And then there's the fixed aspect of traditional media. State-supported media platforms that push messaging out and push narratives out at the behest of the Kremlin, at the behest of President Putin. And the funny thing is, while the takedown operations have gotten rid of the Twitter handles, new ones have popped up. Some of the pages, new ones have popped up. On the traditional media side, those platforms, those outlets, they're still there. RT and Sputnik are still pushing the messaging of the Kremlin. And so how do we build resilience long term? Again, I'm thinking about today and how do we defend against the 2018 election? And also I'm thinking about the 2020. I'm thinking about tomorrow. So in addition to the technical and tactical piece of countering foreign interference and information operations, FBI has clear lead there, working with the intelligence community in the broader technology. But when I think about 2020 and building resilience, what does that look like? That is critical thinking into the American people. It's having them ask the questions of what is this information that's being provided to me? Why is it being provided to me? And what is the outcome that whoever's serving this up to me, what are they trying to accomplish? And to the extent that we can get content neutral, but to the source and say, think about who is giving you and what they're trying to achieve, that's the start of building resilience back into the American people. Nothing about this information operations is new. This is not a new technology. It's not a new invention. It's just using different outlets and using technology. We've figured this out before. We can do it again. We just have to remember the rules of the game. There's no free press in Russia. There's the state-run media outlets. We call them like we see them, and that's the beginning of how we get back to, as I disaggregate, taking the static out of the game and allowing us to really focus a lot of attention the dynamic pieces. So this month, National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we're taking this opportunity where everybody's thinking through basic cyber practices, basic cyber hygiene, and pushing out messaging and of just you do the basics right, but also remember why you're getting presented information. Just like when you get an email from someone you don't recognize and you hover over that hyperlink just to make sure that that's a safe link to click. Same thing goes with social media. Before clicking like, before clicking share or retweet or whatever it is, think about why you're getting presented that information and what the cascading implications of that are. Enjoy the rest of the day. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you very much.